Danielle Smith sets a trap or makes a proposal. I guess it depends on how you look at it. Jen's going to get us caught up on when progs fight progs. It's funny and hilarious, but interesting. And I'm going to throw Jen something that I haven't thrown at anyone before. I've got notes for it. Another glorious chapter in Canadian military procurement. For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. Well, Jen, I gotta start off by confessing an embarrassing error. Does it have to do with the thing that you're going to throw at me that you haven't thrown at anyone else before? No. That I'm saving that for the third segment. And I'm excited.
There's a reason why you don't work for a company with an HR department anymore, Matt. I know this.
The idea that I hadn't thrown that at anyone before you is absurd. I'm so excited for what I'm going to tell you in the third segment. I have notes, and I almost never have notes, but I want to get the details right. But no, look, I had an embarrassing verbal flub and on the line on Tuesday. My guest was Clayton Campbell of the Toronto Police Association. And I guess because I knew professionally, I didn't know him personally well, but I knew the late Clayton Ruby, the Toronto attorney who passed away a few years ago. I repeatedly called Clayton Campbell Clayton Ruby, and I thought I caught all of them in editing, but I missed one. So I have been mocked. I throw myself on my own sword, regret the error. It's just one of those embarrassing flubs, Jen, where I just couldn't help it. I just made it over and over and over. And there's a woman I know, and I've never gotten her name right. I know what her name is. If you asked me to write her name down, I would write it down accurately. I see her. I always identify her by the wrong name. I don't know. It's advancing age or whatever, but my apologies, Clayton Campbell, not
Clayton,
the late
it's your own
Clayton
fault
Ruby.
for being named Clayton. Let's be honest.
No, it's a fine name. It's a very fine name.
It's a great name. It's so great that it's forever attached to one single person.
That's
and
the
it
thing.
ain't you.
There's not many of them. If it was like John,
yes, no problem.
I wouldn't make that mistake. Anyway,
try Clay.
My mistake, and I regret the error.
Okay.
So let's start federal politics. I want to ask you a question. I want you to bird-explain something to me.
Okay.
Earlier this week, amid a lot of hype and buzz, like me over here in the center of the universe, I was seeing the promotional tweets and the sizzle reel and blah, blah, blah. But the Alberta government is proposing a new oil pipeline to the BC coast to export Alberta energy products. They plan, they say, to have a proposal ready in writing to submit to the Major Projects Office in 6 to 8 months. So that's pretty quick by the process of these things. And Danielle Smith and Rob Anders and others were talking about how it's going to be transformative for Alberta and for Canada. One quick little aside before I get to the meat of it. Alberta politicians are starting to talk like Quebec politicians. This will be great for Albertans and Canadians. Something I've noticed, so I'm just going to...
Well, that's probably not an accident either.
No, I suspect it ain't. When I looked at what was actually being proposed by the Alberta government, and I have no objection to this. I'm on record. Build pipelines in every frickin' direction. Every point of the compass and build a pipeline straight up to space. I don't care. I like pipelines. But the thing that jumped out at me, Jen, was that this is not actually an infrastructure proposal. This is bait for Mark Carney. It is a test of the Major Projects Office.
That's bait. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. Star Wars reference. You know I hate making Star Wars references. This is my translation of what Alberta has said. You tell me if I'm crazy. Oh, you've got a Major Projects Office, huh? Oh, we're committed to nation-building projects and unlocking our natural resources, eh? Oh, we're elbows up and having one Canadian economy? Then we want to build a pipeline to the Pacific. Your move, Mr. Carney. Am I reading that wrong?
No. I think that I would add a little more context to that. And I would say, we've
Who
come
has
out
time
of
for context.
I would say we've come out of, a 15-year anti-pipeline, pro-pipeline war, which has proven to be grotesquely inefficient and ultimately self-defeating from a national economic perspective.
Correct.
In an environment in which you had kind of like an environmental core sort of weaponize pipelines as a means of trying to reduce the output of the Alberta oil sands and reduce consumption of oil products more generally, pipelines became like the weak link in the supply chain of the energy project, right? Because of course, pipelines require a lot of capital, they need to be built out, and they require a lot of sort of government, jurisdictional, and community consent in order to get built. Sometimes they involve expropriation of land and those sorts of things.
And they usually cross multiple jurisdictional boundaries.
They usually cross multiple jurisdictions. They also, for example, can sometimes cross sensitive lands. I mean, one of the reasons why the Keystone XL pipeline ran into such opposition is because its pipeline took it across the Ogallala Aquifer, which was a major supplier of water, especially for First Nations and Indigenous bands. So, environmentalists have very intelligently understood that if they want to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, they want to cut down on oil supply. Pipelines were one of the weakest links, and especially if you could sort of mobilize First Nations communities to be opposed to pipelines, that would provide a whole lot of energy and moral weight against the construction of these things. So this has been a 15-year project, 20-year project. Alberta has been consistently frustrated by this. Add to this sort of interprovincial haranguing and internecine warfare within Canada. You've had, Quebec take strong stances. There will never be a pipeline that crosses our jurisdiction. You've had BC take strong stances saying you can't cross our jurisdiction unless you pass our 5 tests and whatever else. All of this sort of undermines the fact that pipelines and cross-jurisdictional infrastructure of this nature clearly falls under federal jurisdiction and always has. There's been really nothing more undermining to confederation and constitutional norms in this country than provinces taking stands saying you can't put federally approved infrastructure through our areas because that has been an overreach of provincial jurisdiction. And not just by Alberta, but by BC and Quebec in particular. So in the midst of this goddamn morass of drama, pipelines have become basically totally uneconomic. And you'll have some economists say, well, yeah, they're not economic in an environment where you have $64 a barrel oil on WCS and WTF. But I think that also they have become uneconomic for purely political reasons, because nobody's going to put down billions of dollars on a pipeline that is going to get dragged through a 10-year fight between multiple jurisdictions facing considerable, public opposition, particularly from First Nations communities. It's a reputational risk. It's a huge financial risk. And, in an environment of regulatory uncertainty, which is the jargonish way of summing this problem up, why bother? Right? Like if you're a pipeline company, and I mean, I've heard people from pipeline companies say this, if you're going to invest in building pipelines, you're going to go to America, or you're going to go to other jurisdictions where, the demand for the product is equally there and the return on the capital invested is much more certain. There's just no economic reason to be messing with Canada. We're just too much of a goddamn shit show. So in this environment, what's happened is pipelines have increasingly become public infrastructure or the purview of public infrastructure. So you saw this, for example, with the expansion of the TMX pipeline.
Had to be nationalized to get it finished.
It had to be nationalized because Kinder Morgan took one look at this and said, not only can we not even continue to expand this necessary pipeline, which is already on a pre-existing route. The pipeline had been there for 60 years. Not only has this become so politically fraught, we can't even expand on what's already there. But increasingly, even just owning the pipeline that had been there for 60 years had become politically fraught. So this is the environment where Kinder Morgan put up their hands and said, we don't want to do this anymore. We're out. We're out of this country.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah. And the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau bought the pipeline in order to facilitate its expansion, much to the confusion of many Albertans. And by the way, their hope was that they would be able to sell the pipeline, preferably to some kind of Indigenous-owned consortium. But even selling the pipeline has proved to be a bloody nightmare because, again, nobody wants to take it because the political risks on this are so fraught. So this is the environment in which you have Alberta say, fine then, we'll just build a pipeline and we'll do this on the taxpayer dime. And normally the conservative part of me would be like, you're picking winners and losers, fuck you. Mm-hmm. And the pragmatist in me is saying, no private company is willing to do this stuff anymore because we've created such a mess of our regulatory system. We've created so much confusion in our regulatory system that no private company will touch this stuff. So because Alberta itself massively benefits to the tune of multiple billions of dollars a year on the sale of the oil products, because remember, the oil is actually owned by the people of Alberta, and we get paid significant royalties on its production, there's an economic argument for the province of Alberta building, nationalizing, and creating a pipeline out. So that is the deeper context. The too long didn't listen to what Jen just rambled on about for the last 10 minutes version of this is, yeah, absolutely. This is chicken. Because one way or the other, they're either going to get a pipeline, in which case, look, we've won and we've delivered for the people of Alberta, and now we can increase production and get a couple more $1 billion a year out of our existing assets. Or the federal government's going to screw the pooch. They're not going to approve the pipeline. The whole thing's going to be a giant mess. And guess what the province of Alberta has for the next 10 years? Mm-hmm. They've got a cudgel that they can use to make all Albertans angry and come to their defense. The federal government's out to get you. See, we proved it. Which was,
there's a third option too.
Oh, what's the third option? That
Carney is all in. The Major Projects Office embraces it, and nothing happens anyway because the Canadian bureaucratic state or BC resistance or Indigenous lawsuits just grind it to a halt, in which case it just loops right back. It's like one of these flowchart things where it just goes right back to what Jen was saying a minute ago, in which case Alberta's got another 10, 15 years that if we did everything right, we had a major projects officer, we had a prime minister who's bought in on it, we still can't get it done. This country is dysfunctional.
Absolutely. And then they will use that argument not only to deflect from their own internal governance failures, because as long as they can keep people ginned up and angry about the other, they're not paying attention to what's happening internally. And we'll be getting more into that later. But at the same time, they're also slowly building the argument for separation. Mm-hmm. Because if the country is dysfunctional, the country can't build a pipeline, nothing gets done, nothing gets built here as it is, well, screw it. We're out. Right? Like it's a trap. It's absolutely a trap.
I want to, just because I phrased it that way, I want our Albertan listeners to know, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's great. Like what Smith is doing is smart. This is smart. And if Carney is smart,
he will bulldozer this thing through.
He will personally rent a digger from Home Depot and dig a trench from the Alberta border right fucking through the Rockies all the way to Tidewater. They're going to try to do how they did the Panama Canal, which is to dig through a mountain from coast to coast. That is what Carney should do, from the Alberta border right to water. Personally. If he has to. Send Michael Sabia.
And then if this thing winds up being a giant boondoggle of taxpayer funds, fine, let Alberta eat it. Right? Like, that's not our problem. We gave you the approvals. We will let Alberta suffer the economic consequences of its choices. But yeah, absolutely. This is a one play move here. Carney either digs the pipeline and gets it done, or he's feeding into exactly what Smith and a band of separatists effectively want, which is that they want to see Canada fail in order to give them a pretext for leaving.
There's actually another great reason to do it too, though.
Why?
I'm not saying this to pick on BC. I actually am completely agnostic about who eats the bullet here. I'm about to use a violent political metaphor. I want everyone to understand this is not literal. This is political rhetoric. We need to shoot someone. We need to send a signal that, sorry, the days of endless lawfare and foot dragging and bureaucratic wrangling is over. The federal government needs to restore order over what is rightfully its terrain, including this kind of thing. I don't care which province gets it. Like, I'm agnostic on that. I do not have anything out for BC in particular. but it would be a good thing for the country, for the feds to take this project, look Danielle Smith in the eye and say, we are behind you 100% of the way, and we will play hardball with BC to get it done. And I'm not saying that to piss BC off. I just think you have to restore order here. You've got to shoot a mutineer.
Look, if this has to be a confederation, or it can't, or it will devolve. Yeah. It will continue to devolve. Are we a confederation or are we not? We have to make that decision collectively as a nation. The other thing I would say is it's very interesting that they've chosen the BC route rather than Churchill, because one of the a lot of chatter for the last 10 years has been, let's not try and get pipelines through hostile corridors to the east and to the west. Why don't we create a port in Churchill, put tons of money and sort of build up Churchill, Manitoba, turn that into a major port as the Northwest Passages effectively melts, that cements some of our political and international sort of credibility on that particular passage. It helps sort of build the infrastructure networks up to the Arctic, which, as we've talked about the line before, has that huge strategic advantage to us. And it helps create or sort of put money and investment into an economically depressed area. The path to Churchill, Manitoba has been one of these sorts of dream projects for a lot of people in conservative circles for a really long time. And it's a really ambitious approach. So it's interesting to me that we've decided to go to BC rather than Manitoba, which I think actually would be in some ways an easier political lift. It's also interesting to me that we're not even attempting to go through Quebec.
Yeah, a couple of things I would say in response to that. I've looked at the Churchill plans. I know a little bit about the Churchill facilities and also its geography because like many moons ago, it was being floated as a possible Royal Canadian Navy base. And it has all the same pros, but all the same cons as a fleet base as it does for an LNG or oil export facility, which is there's a lot in its favor. And there's a lot of problems too. There's a lot of challenges, particularly with even seasonal ice. So it would be hard to do. But I think, Jen, and again, this is going to sound like a criticism. I actually mean it as an observation or maybe even an outright compliment of Alberta. But no, doing it through BC is the smart thing to do for the reasons I said before. Like, you're probably right. You probably could have a less bumpy political path by proposing it for Churchill. But I think the bumps are the points. Like, this is Alberta going, oh, okay. Like I said, so we've got an MPO now, huh? We got a major projects office. We have a nation building prime minister and national scale projects. Cool. We want Pacific Tidewater. And we have, look, I'm aware that there's skepticism about whether a second pipeline is needed. I'm agnostic on that. I don't know the numbers. But they'll put together a case for it. They'll put together an economic case. They'll put together a legal case, and then they'll dare the feds or BC to shoot it down.
Well, not only that, but ultimately, look, if there isn't actually an economic case for it and the pipeline's empty and this doesn't increase capacity, the people who have to eat the cost for this are Albertans. So that's really ultimately not, I realize that this is going to be disputed because economic viability is part of the process about deciding how projects get approved. But ultimately, like, look, if Albertan taxpayers are willing to eat a multi-billion-dollar loss on the pipeline because it matters that much to them, fuck the rest of you. You know what I mean? Like, let us eat the loss then. Ultimately, that's for the Alberta taxpayer to take up with the provincial government at election time if it doesn't pan out.
People have a right to make bad decisions.
That's right. Or they ought to. Or they ought to, within reason.
I'm sorry. I meant that to sound world weary, not aspirational, but Jen took it a totally different way. Yeah, look, I find it interesting. And I am curious to see how the Major Projects Office works. One of the things that was noted when it was announced, we talked about it here, was how a lot of the projects that were being picked up were, I think, cleverly, I know what the Liberals were doing. They were picking projects that already had significant work done or were relatively straightforward in terms of social license
it's
economic.
Not been an ambitious list. Let's just put it that way.
And I can understand. I get it. You got to build confidence, right? It's like when you send the hockey team out on the ice to go warm up the goalie, you always kind of tell them, let them stop the first few shots. Like, you want the goalie, like, you want to kind of get the MPO feeling like they're invincible out there. But what Alberta is proposing, it ain't that. It's a new project
ambitious.
starting effectively. I don't want to say it's from zero, right? Because, there's probably 500,000 nerds in Alberta who could like grab any random atlas and draw their preferred route just with a pencil on it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of a regulatory perspective, politically, they're going to be starting this one from zero. And I just think that's a really interesting test case. I hope, and I am loading that term with as much verbal skepticism as possible, I hope the feds knew this was coming. Like, I hope they're not sitting in Ottawa going this week and going, my God, Premier Smith, she's totally outplayed us here. Like, I'm really hoping the Carney guys are going, oh, okay, here it is. I'm hoping
this is being done in a backroom way in tandem with Carney. Like, I'm hoping Smith and Carney have had backroom conversations where Carney's been like, what do you want to build? Smith's like, let's build a pipeline. Carney's like, get it done. You know what I mean? Like, I'm actually hoping there's already cooperation on some of this, at least in an unofficial way.
Boy, if David Eby's listening to this podcast, he's going to be pissed.
Yeah, but you know what? Jason Kenney put on Twitter the other day a giant tirade about how the biggest threat to Confederation in this country right now is David Eby. And you know what? I think Kenney's made a pretty strong case for it.
Rob Shaw, writing for us just a couple of weeks ago, was talking about how, he wrote this for us a week or two ago, but he's also written a bunch of these before, where Rob has noted that Eby is rapidly being converted to pragmatism by political reality on things like safer streets or injection sites and drug policy in general, not incarceration, but confinement for the mentally ill, for mandatory treatment, on LNG. Eby, on some Indigenous stakeholder consultation stuff. Like, Rob has written repeatedly how Eby is looking at domestic political forces in BC, domestic economic reality in BC, and also Mr. Trump down in Washington. And Eby is basically lining up the BC NDP's sacred cows and just retractable bulleting them all, one after another. This is going to be the next nut to crack. And Alberta doesn't have the political or economic firepower to do it alone. But if they bring their buddy Carney, the feds will have some leverage there, and then Eby's going to have to decide for himself. So if Carney's smart, and it's the second time this podcast I've said that, you make BC an offer they can't refuse. Token symbolic bullshit resistance to this, followed by fairly rapid acquiescence, and we'll help you somewhere else. We'll get something built for you.
Sure.
It's just like, we're not even talking sophisticated 3D chess level politics. No. This is basic politics.
Yeah, I think that's right. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. This one's going to be an interesting test case. I totally agree. We are going to talk a little bit more about Alberta domestic politics because I just came back from the last Alberta Next panel and was, how shall I say this, unimpressed. But that's much to the chagrin of many of our commentators. That's fine. Look, do we want to talk about that now, or do we want to talk about that in the second segment, or do we have got more federal politics to talk about first?
You know what? Go for it now. Like, I do have one thing to talk about on federal politics, but it's a better fit in the third segment. So why don't you? Yeah, you went to the Alberta Next panel.
Yeah, I went to
the
Alberta Next. So just people who that was the last one, right?
There's not anymore.
There's the last one. So basically, every apparently couple of years now, an Alberta premier decides to do a town hall style panel where they go around the province talking about exactly the same remedies to the systemic inequalities of Confederation that they've been talking about since roughly 2003. So this is a 20-year project. The solutions are the same all the time. Although some wins and gains are added or lost. So back in 2003, it was dealing with federal equalization, which is a longstanding complaint in Alberta. Having our own police force, collecting our own taxes, controlling our own immigration. That one kind of comes and goes, and having our own provincial pension plan. And then Jason Kenney took power in 2020, and he decided to have the Fair Deal panel that dealt with exactly those same issues minus the wheat board, because we had managed to successfully get rid of the wheat board. Huzzah. And now this year we're having the Alberta Next panel where we're talking about all these exact same issues, except now we're adding more of an emphasis on controlling more immigration. And all of these panels and all these ideas come back to basically the Alberta Firewall Letter, which has been kicking around for literally a generation now. They're essentially Alberta taking more control over how it manages its own issues in the exact same way that Quebec has already done. Yeah. So Quebec, you want to be a nation. Quebec gets to collect its own taxes. Quebec gets to control its own immigration. Quebec has its own pension plan because it never signed on to the CPP, and Quebec has its own police force. God damn it, Alberta will do the same too, because fuck you, rest of Canada. That's why. The problem is that there's a lot of, how should I say this? I would say generalized anger toward Quebec. And toward the federal government and toward Ottawa generally.
I'm not sure those are separate things in the eyes of some Albertans.
That's true. And I would say much of that anger and grievance is grounded in reality. Like that, we can get into that. Like I think so too. I don't think that the grievances are wrong necessarily. I think sometimes they're overplayed for domestic political consumption. But when Alberta complains about equalization, there is a legitimate complaint there. For people who may not be aware, I will go into it for the 1 gazillionth time. But essentially, Alberta is by far the wealthiest per capita province in Confederation. We're richer here, and because we're richer, we pay more taxes to the federal government, and the federal government then redistributes those tax funds. A significant portion of those of its revenues get redistributed through equalization payments. Equalization payments are intended to provide equal services right across the country. And the way that equalization payments are structured, a lot of that money goes to wealthy provinces like Quebec and Ontario. Not so much to places like, Newfoundland and PEI and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, which from an Albertan perspective is, if the money were all going to the Atlantic provinces in order to provide equal levels of services, we'd be fine with that. But the fact that so much of this, in fact, almost all of the equalization money is going to places that disproportionately favor largely liberal seats and liberal governments, that presents a very significant political problem. And, it's billions of dollars more per year that Albertans pay into the federal coffers than it gets back in transfers and services. Again, that is a direct consequence of the fact that we're richer.
Just to prevent pedants from coming after you, it's not a provincial treasury transfer; it's the taxes paid by Albertans.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to make that clear. But yes, no, it's not like Albertans pay taxes to some kind of bucket fund. And then a fund,
the taxes
and then
they pay normal.
No, but like we make a lot more money in this province per capita than anyone else in the country. And because we have a progressive income tax system, you make more money, you pay more money in taxes. That's how that works. Yeah. Right? That's why the money is going out. So look, that's a legitimate grievance. It's a legitimate problem, I think. I don't think that you're ever going to have any kind of system where the richest people aren't paying more than they're getting back in services and transfers, because of course you're not. That's how taxation works, friends. But does the taxation have to be structured in the way that it is, or should it be structured in the way it is? Should equalization payments be structured in the way they are? One of the big beefs that Albertans have is that the way that equalization is structured disincentivizes Quebec from developing, for example, its own hydroelectric resources, because the more it develops its hydroelectric resources, the less it gets back in equalization, ironically. So like this is a counterproductive incentive. This is a countervailing incentive, and it's not healthy. That being said, when I listen to go to these panels, or when I go to this panel, I hear exactly the same grievances with exactly the same proposed measures again and again and again, year after year after year. And I kind of feel a little bit of sympathy for the separatists. Because if you've had it drummed into you that all of Alberta's problems are the result of equalization payments and evil Ottawa taking Alberta for granted and hating us and blah, 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 and these are all of our problems, and Alberta politicians have made hay for 2 freaking decades on these problems, saying this is an imminent existential problem and Confederation's failing for us and blah, 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 and for 2 decades have fundamentally failed to resolve those problems, how could you help but come away from that observation with anything but the conclusion that separation was the only answer? right? Like if you've bought into the mentality and you've bought into what these Alberta politicians have been selling you for 20 years, and yet these Alberta politicians, even though they've said the right thing, clearly can't make any progress because the system is so rigged against us. You know, how could you, of course you're coming to the conclusion that separatism is the only answer, right? Like the problem that I have with a lot of this is that for the Alberta politicians have been doing this for 20 years. They've been ginning up grievances against Ottawa for domestic political consumption because it serves their domestic political interest, while effectively undermining the entire role of their own government. Because if you keep on telling people that these are existential crises and you should be bloody angry about them, and yet you can never resolve the problem, sooner or later that anger is going to pop. That anger's got to go somewhere, right? And that's a lot of a lot of that anger is going into that separatist sentiment now. Now, there's a counter argument to all of these grievances, by the way, right? There's a counter argument to the equalization formula conversation. There's a way that we can resolve the equalization formula in a more equitable way. You know, we need to have cooperation among other provinces in order to do that, but there's a way to do this. You know, and frankly, all of Alberta's problems are not caused by Ottawa. That's just not true. A lot of Alberta's problems are caused by Alberta's own internal dysfunction. I talk about this in the column. You know, Alberta right now is making this play that we want more taxation points. We want to shift the taxation so that Alberta collects more of its own taxes for its own citizens and we reduce federal transfers. Great. But just so that we're clear, the UCP and the PC government before that had a real dismal record on spending. After Ralph Klein came through the door, we started spending like drunken sailors, and we're now on track for a $6.5 billion deficit, despite healthy oil revenues.
I'm going to tell you about that in a minute, but you go on.
We're going to go in there. Like, our own provincial problems, most of them are internally created by our own internal dysfunction.
Yeah.
So I think I would have a lot more sympathy for a lot of these Alberta Next panels and a lot of the ideas that provincial leaders were trying to implement. I'd have way more sympathy for the idea that Alberta should be more like Quebec. If A, I saw Quebec functioning real great, I don't. And secondly, if I had a lot of faith that our Alberta provincial leadership was capable of actually managing those finances and powers more effectively than the federal government is. And I don't see a lot of evidence of that. This goes back to the false dichotomy of just because the federal government is bad doesn't mean the provincial government is better. Just because N is bad doesn't mean X is better simply because X opposes N. They can both be equally shit, just so that we're clear.
Yeah, but differently shit, but equally.
Differently shit, but equally. Yeah. So, you know, this is where you kind of lose me on this sort of stuff. I'd be much more sympathetic to making arguments and making columns and making proposals to the effect of Alberta should control more of its provincial resources if I saw over the last 3 years that Danielle Smith's government were managing the provincial resources we do have real great.
Are you ready for me to cause a national unity crisis?
Another one? My God, have we been condemned by Quebec yet? I really feel like we won't have made it until Quebec's National Assembly.
The National Assembly censors us, yeah.
There you go.
Being in a federation with Alberta is like living with a bipolar roommate. Mm. But instead of being linked to brain chemicals, it's linked to oil prices. Because, and this is me as a guy who likes Alberta and is generally friendly to Albertans, I'm disposed positively to it, and I pay attention. What happens is that oil prices start going up and Albertans just start going on the high part of the cycle. We don't need you. We don't need you upper Canadians. We're going to go out and we're going to ramp our spending way above where it was before because we're never, ever going to run out of money. And then oil prices go down like slightly. And then Albertans wake up in a collective provincial hangover. It's like, again, it's like a roommate who, like, when they're high on the high part of the cycle, they have unbelievable levels of confidence. They're the life of the party. They're hilarious. But then in the morning they wake up, they're like, did I spend $800 last night on bottle service at the bar? You're like, well, yeah, you were the life of the party. They're like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for that. Oil prices went down slightly. One of the things that Quebec has been figuring out in recent years, Premier Legault has been a driving factor of this, is that no one's going to take Quebec sovereignty seriously until Quebec gets its economic house in order. Because a bunch of bankrupt guys who are completely fiscally dependent on the rest of us threatening to leave, we just go,
yeah.
Okay.
Sure you are.
Okay, there, Jacques. Yeah.
Oh no, $13 billion more in the federal coffer that we don't have to pay you.
Oh darn.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the things I think Quebec, and they ain't there yet, but I think some smart Quebecers have been realizing until we get our own house in order, not only do we look like idiots threatening to separate, but if we did separate, it would be a catastrophe.
Yeah, you couldn't sustain your shit.
Bingo. Alberta has yet to have that conversation.
Well, yeah, look, separatism
you guys
is
have not gotten your house in order.
I think it's a reflection of internal anger than it is a serious movement here, and I don't. It's not like I know that people get angry at me when I say that because like I am serious. Look at how angry I am. And I'm like, no, your anger convinces me that you're not serious. Like, you're not making thoughtful, rational debates on this issue. Like you're thinking. In fact, there's not even consensus among the separatists themselves about what their goals are. Are your goals to separate and become an independent state? Are your goals to become the 51st state? Or are you using this as leverage in order to get more concessions out of Ottawa? There's no internal consensus on those matters as far as I can tell. So, when you all decide what the goal is, then come demand to be taken seriously. Until then, I'm under no obligation. Thank you very much.
Alberta's sovereignty, I think, as a viable force will exist when the province has gotten its internal house in order sufficiently that fairly moderate fluxes in a very unstable, globally traded commodity do not run the risk of bankrupting your nascent state. Well,
no, this is clear. We're not going to be bankrupt. But where I do think that most Albertans understand that. Thanks, Matt. However, I think most Albertans actually are very supportive about getting us off of oil and gas dependency and don't like our over-dependency on oil and gas. What Albertans don't love to hear is the fact that we barely sustain our own healthcare system on our own taxations alone. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason why we have extremely highly priced public services and low taxes is because of oil royalties. Mm-hmm. So this is the reality of what we've created for ourselves. The other thing that I think most Albertans really struggle to understand as well, and being Albertan here, I'm going to say this: we have the capacity and the fiscal capacity and the internal capacity to solve 95% of our own problems, mm-hmm. without. Even if Ottawa were the most evil, terrible, hate Alberta, gonna run you into the ground, anti-Alberta, whatever you could possibly imagine, Alberta still has the internal resources to be the wealthiest, most productive, most innovative province in the country, even with a hostile a hostile Ottawa. Even if all that's true, we have the internal resources and capacity to solve 95% of our problems. We choose to solve 60% of our problems and to split the difference and blame Ottawa for the rest. That's an internal choice that we are making. That's an internal choice that we are consistently making. That doesn't mean that the last 5% of the road is within our control. I mean, there are some things that are outside of our control. There are some inequities. 100%. There are some real grievances. But we can fix 95% of our issues. We literally can. We just choose not to because they're hard. Right? And instead, it's just much easier to be more or less a complacent province where shit kind of goes to hell on some stuff and we're kind of dysfunctional, a little corrupt, whatever. But just ignore that, gloss over that because Ottawa's the problem. Ottawa's the problem. That's what we do. And I just think it's stupid. I'm bored of it. I've been here too long. I've seen this game play out too many times. I've heard these grievances too many times. I've heard the rebuttals too many times. I really would just like us as a province to start taking care of what we can take care of to the best of our ability before I continue this Ottawa's to blame for all of our problems train. Let's just fix the problems we can fix, and then funny, I'll be in a good position to listen to your complaints about Ottawa.
The funny thing is, though, Jen, or the sad thing, I guess, from your hilarious from my perspective, but sad, I guess, from yours, is that one of the things you hear, and you've even mentioned this today, and I get it. What you're saying is factually correct, where a lot of Albertans look to Quebec and kind of, okay, we need to like figure out what they're doing. Like we need to start kind of claiming the same role. We need to start asserting ourselves in the same way. In a lot of ways, Alberta is becoming like Quebec.
Yeah,
but
a
not
basket
the good ways.
case. No, it's becoming more and more of a like. I'm sorry. So we're going to emulate a poorer province that's more shittily run, more corrupt, and more of a mess. That's our plan here. That's a group. Oh yeah, let's be more like Quebec. That great
You're not
plan.
gonna
Super.
Instead of getting the police force and the pension plan, you're getting the cronyism, political dysfunction,
exactly,
and populist rage farming in place of actual solutions. Because I think you're right.
That's exactly
Alberta has the talent base and the resource wealth, and also like other things. This can be almost. It sounds like I'm a CIA world fact book here, but also like Alberta has highly developed services, like the combination of people, geographic stability, highly advanced service economy combined with natural resource wealth is all that you guys would need to either be, well, being a separate country would be difficult because of geopolitical constraints, but you could be a much more functional province.
We could be
easily
radically more
without
functional.
changing anything.
And the other thing is that do you want to know how to get rid of equalization tomorrow? Do you want to know how we fix the equalization problem tomorrow?
Go poor?
Yeah. Look, if we were as poor as Quebec, the equalization problem would be resolved. If we were making per capita what
Poor
the
like
average
Quebec.
Quebecer were making, equalization disappears tomorrow. And then, hey, are we better off? No. And we're just as poor and dysfunctional as Quebec. Well done, everybody. Anyway, I got nothing more to say about that. But look, we are going to talk about drama at my former alma mater, Toronto Metropolitan University. Prague versus Prague violence is one of our favorite subjects here at The Line. And then we're going to talk a little bit more generically about other stuff. So I'm going to put a pin on it right there. We're going to come back. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca.
This episode of The Line Podcast is also brought to you by the Daily Bread Food Bank. Imagine choosing between food, rent, or medicine. For the 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities living in poverty, that is the daily reality. The Canada Disability Benefit was created to help, but at less than $7 a day, it isn't enough. Daily Bread Food Bank and coalition partners are urging government to fully fund the benefit. Visit fundthebenefit.ca to take action. Together, we can ensure every Canadian with a disability has the dignity of food and security.
Okay, Matt, I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on at my alma mater, although I'm not sure if it's still my alma mater, because back when I went to Ryerson University, it was still called Ryerson University, and now it's generically named Toronto University Number 2, I believe was the official
TMU, Toronto
generic
Metropolitan University.
Toronto Downtown University's Number 2, the less important and good one.
You know, the Jenner kids still call Caitlin Dad, so I think you can still call Ryerson your alma mater.
Okay, fair enough. Look, so Ryerson has become, I think, safe to say, a very progressive institution in recent years. I think it was always so, even when I was there, but it's certainly become more so in in light of recent events. That's fine. I think there's room for that. I have no objection.
Late in the 1990s, when I was in high school, was doing like figuring out like where to send applications. Literally everyone was like, don't go to Ryerson. Go to Ryerson for like very specific programs where they actually have some program excellence. But otherwise, Ryerson is where you go if you really just want to be an annoying politician. And that was like teachers, guidance counselors, parents, friends. So no, it hasn't changed that much.
Well, look, there's no institution more progressive than a really insecure polytechnic that's trying to pretend to be a university. So there we go. I said it. And I say one of the excellent programs that Ryerson always had was its journalism program, which is where I went very unwisely. But there you go. No,
and it worked out great for everybody.
It worked out great for me. I definitely was therefore put onto the path of greatness and success. So 2 years ago, October 7th happens. Ryerson University has decided that it needed a law school for some reason. And not only that it needed a law school, but it needed a progressive law school because we needed more progressive lawyers in this country. Why does Ryerson need a law school? Why does a school
because the journalism school revenue's drying up fast.
Well, that could be it. I mean, but why does a school that really should be, making its mark in excellence in things like design and interior design and art? Anyway, look, they decided they needed a progressive law school, and so a progressive law school they had. And in the wake of October 7th, in case you were not aware, the students at this progressive law school decided to create an open letter demanding that Ryerson as an institution take a stand in favor of the Palestinian cause, not just take a stand in favor of the Palestinian cause and, engage in the usual BDS stuff that you see in university campuses, but also they rather explicitly condoned the terrorist actions of October 7th, saying, and I will grab the quote here if you'll allow me one moment here. This is the quote from the letter. Does not include a line about standing in solidarity, quote, with Palestine and support all forms of Palestinian resistance and efforts toward liberation, which I think is a pretty clear and explicit condoning of October 7th, especially in an open letter that came out 2 weeks after October 7th.
They hadn't even finished vacuuming up all the body parts yet, and the TMU kiddies are signing on with all forms of resistance. Yeah.
Now, you and I have made our positions known on open letters generally and how people should never sign them because, of course, people will sign on with their own ambitions, ideologies, and agendas. And oftentimes what the letter writers are writing may differ slightly from what the individuals signing on may disagree with, and the way people will interpret a letter may be different from what the individuals really do agree to.
But if it's worth saying, say it yourself.
Say it yourself. Put your own name to it and call it a day. That being said, these were ostensibly, legal students being taught about the importance of the written word and the meanings of the words that you write and the meanings of the words that you sign on to. So when about 70 of them signed on, there was a very significant backlash from people who were understandably horrified that law students were signing up. Students who were in support of the law and being trained about the law were signing up for a letter that explicitly condoned an act of terrorism. And I think that is a fair interpretation of what was in that letter. The school reacted and said, this letter does not support our values and beliefs. And I think they were quite cagey in terms of how they framed their own response. They said, and we don't support acts of anti-Semitism and intolerance. Okay, fine. Many of the students who signed on to this letter kind of got doxxed. They got boycotted. It's almost certain that some of them will suffer legal repercussions as a result of putting their names on this letter.
Probably more professional than legal, like law firms might not.
Sorry, I meant professional, not legal in that context. So this week, Robin Doolittle from the Globe and Mail comes out and says, apparently the students of this letter are now suing the school for defamation because the school implied that the letter was anti-Semitic and intolerant. That's one worth unpacking. And then there's the second argument that's coming up in this lawsuit, which I think is just fascinating and actually worth unpacking. And I'm quoting Robin's story directly here. But the lawsuit also accuses TMU's School of Law of negligent misrepresentation and breach of contract for promising prospective students an unapologetically progressive legal education and then failing to follow through on that commitment. And that's an interesting argument because TMU did frame their law school as being on board with left-wing, progressive, this is the agenda of our law school, this is the way we're going about it. They did do that. So, Matt, two things. One, on the defamation front, I don't think these kids have a leg to stand on. I think that the school, personally, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal scholar. I would be shocked if they could actually get the school on this. And that's because of the way that the school framed the response. The school framed the response as this letter does not reflect our community values and we don't support anti-Semitism and intolerance on campus. So I think that they gave themselves enough wiggle room that they did not say this letter is anti-Semitic and intolerant. But you know what? We'll see how that particular claim plays out in the courts. Then we'll come into the question of whether or not even if they are found that the school did call the letter anti-Semitic and intolerant, was the letter anti-Semitic and intolerant will be the next test of that particular defense claim. So I think that that's worth unpacking. But then I want to get into the breach of contract one, because that one's really interesting to me.
Honestly, I think the first one is pretty quick to unpack. I basically share your position. One of the things I remember after this letter got leaked, because I think Jen summarized it, but just for explicit clarity here, it was students who generated this letter. They began passing it around to other students with, WhatsApp links or email or whatever. Like, hey, here's the open letter, sign your name to it. And in the immediate aftermath of the clusterfuck of like the letter getting out, because it was an open document and
you
people
put your name on it for public consumption.
Yeah. But like some students at Ryerson, God bless them, or TMU, whatever, they actually looked at the thing and went, there's some problems here. Some of those students were either Jewish or at least positively disposed to Israel, or maybe they were just fucking horrified by what had just happened. And they shared the text of it. And then what happened was that the media, and you mentioned Robin Doodle, she might have been one of them. I don't remember if she was, but I think she's been on this story for a while.
Yeah, she has.
Began finding some of the signatories who were basically, hey, why did you sign this thing basically saying we support any form of Palestinian resistance, which clearly would include, by nature of its phrasing, what just happened.
Yeah. Classic lesson in if you're a law student, if you were like in the interior design department, I'd maybe give you a little bit of a pass, but you're a law student.
Some of these kids, and if I remember correctly, the reporters, because there was more than a few of them, usually granted anonymity to these terrified early 20-somethings.
Sure.
But more than one of them was like, I didn't really read it. Like someone, like a girl I liked sent it to me and I signed it. Or I was hungover that morning and I kind of glanced at it. I was like, yeah, this is fine. And I signed it. And the reason I'm not too worried about TMU's ability to win the legal fight is because in a fight between a bunch of cub wannabe lawyers who were too fucking stupid to read the document about the terror attack before signing it, or the law school and university administrators who would have run their response through their general counsel before releasing it, I know who I'm putting my 20 on. If that's going to be the fight on issue 1, I think TMU gonna win. To the second point, though, about whether or not TMU has misrepresented itself, I don't think this is the best example of what Jen and I have been talking about in recent years about how pendulum is swinging, but it's a pretty good one. TMU a few years ago was like, we are going to sign ourselves on as unapologetically progressive.
We're going to be on the right side of history. Yeah. Our law school will be on the right side of history. 100
years from now, we will be honored for having taken a position early that we are progressive, because history's bending our way, baby, and we got nothing to worry about. And like what? Like a handful of years later, your students are suing you for objecting to unconditional support to an anti-Semitic massacre? Life comes at you fast, you fucking morons.
Okay, so here's where I would brief this.
Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, I mean, look, I try to be quite open-minded toward the idea that different types of institutions can take on different types of roles in society. Sure. And like, I'm cool with that. I think different kinds of media institutions can play different kinds of ideological frameworks and that's fine. Everybody knows the Star is a left-wing newspaper. Everybody knows that the Post is a right-wing newspaper. And in a healthy media environment, you have lots of these different kinds of organizations with different perspectives. Not all things have to be the same. Not all things have to be all things to all people. So in theory, I think I should be okay with a legal school saying, look, we're going to be a progressive legal school that focuses on progressive legal interpretation. Okay, but you're a legal school. Your job is to your job. It's okay. I think you have to expose your students to progressive legal interpretation. And I think you have to expose your students to conservative legal interpretation and everything in between. Because if you're not exposing your students to a really wide range of viewpoints, they're going to fall like an egg against pavement the second they have to argue a case in reality. And like, I don't know, isn't this a perfect example of the problems of a quote unquote progressive legal school on its face? That effectively you've empowered a kind of groupthink among your own students that allowed them to not even read the open letter they were signing before they signed off on it?
I think everything you're saying is valid and fair, and I think accurate and wise. Jen Gerson, accurate and wise, put it on a label. But I just respond to it a little bit differently. TMU here fell victim, not like I'm not disappointed in them because they failed to think it through in that way, although I think you're right.
Well, look, I mean, we've kind of established that TMU is not, it ain't Queens, okay? There's room for that. There's room for the kids like me in a borderline university, all right? There has to be.
What jumps out at me, and it's something we've written about in different contexts, but we've written about a lot, and we've written about it on both right and left in recent years. Institutions, groups, events, whatever, that are designed explicitly to attract people of a certain ideological color become swamped by it, and then that center of gravity starts to drift. So if you are appealing to lefties, you will be swamped by lefties, and then more normies will leave, which means the center of gravity will shift to the left, which will change who's attracted to it. And then more weirdo lefties will come, and less normie people will now be like, this is too weird, and they'll leave. This is like, we've seen this, like, a weird example. And I'm going to compare TMU Law School to an encampment. Come to think of it, maybe actually not that weird. Everybody shows up to protest injustice. That's day one. By day 7, you're wondering who all these weirdos who've moved in are, so you leave. By day 10, your encampment is full of weirdos. That's what TMU has done to itself with their law school. When you explicitly are calling out for people of a certain ideological worldview, you're going to get them. And then they're going to start pulling you to the natural extreme of that worldview. And you, unless you're very, very smart, have probably not built in any lines of defense, whether it's institutional or bureaucratic or whatever, to stop that drift from happening. I don't know. If this lawsuit goes anywhere, maybe it won't. We'll find out in court if TMU is smart enough to build in some defense.
The breach of contract one is actually much more interesting than the defamation one for me, because also, does promising you an unapologetically quote unquote progressive education mean that there's nothing that you can say or do that the university could condemn, provided it falls under the rubric of progressive values?
Right? Worse than that, any conceivable rubric.
Any conceivable. Like, okay, values. So just so that we're clear, you want to cover your face with black masks, go full black bloc protest, smash open the TMU bookstore in the name of anti-capitalist whatever, in which case, you can go for it, right? It's not my problem. But then, and the university condemns that and maybe suspends you for engaging in that. But you promised us an are we arguing that there's no boundary or guardrail here at all? And if there is no boundary or guardrail here, then, who's to blame for that? Who failed to establish the boundary or guardrail? Who maybe didn't think that one through when they established the law school? I don't know. Just sort of thing is the sort of thing you should establish when you're creating a law school. Seems like a law school would be really committed to the idea of understanding and having a clear expectations of boundaries and guardrails. I don't know. Sort of seems like the sort of things that law professors would be into.
I've met some law professors. I'm not that surprised. No, look, you know me, I'm not anti-elite. I'm not anti-intellectual, but if there is a group of people who have a greater habit of being mugged by reality than white collar professional academics,
white collar professional law professors, I don't know. I
don't know if they're the worst, but it's
anyway. That was just my little thing. I just wanted to talk. I find it really interesting. I'm actually very curious to see where this case goes. I'm curious to see how it gets argued in the courts. We'll follow it. On that note, do we want to just put an end point there? Because we're running late today. So
I've got some fun stuff to bring you. So we'll drop a like and subscribe here at www.readtheline.ca. Sign up for more of whatever the hell this is, and you'll probably enjoy it. All right, I'm excited. I've been sitting on this.
Oh, you're so excited. I'm so pleased.
All right, so I want to make a serious point first, and then I want to make something that's funnier.
All right.
Serious point. Less exciting part. I'm less excited about this. Earlier this week, it was announced that there's going to be something called like the Defense Procurement Agency, I think it was called.
Sure.
And the idea of it is that we will establish a new specialized bureaucracy that will only focus on high cost military procurements, right? So it won't be covering the boots and the sleeping bags and the ammunition and things like that. But it's, if you need a new fleet of tanks or a new fleet of ships or a new fleet of jets, and incidentally, yes, we do times 3, this will be the organization that will exist to do it. And I have 2 points. Here's the serious one. First of all, I'm getting nervous about something I'm seeing here from the Carney government. I understand the problem they're trying to fix here, and it is right. Like, they have correctly identified a problem in Canadian public policy. But it's reminding me of the Major Projects Office. When confronted with a dysfunctional bureaucratic blob that cannot do what it's supposed to do, we are creating new, additional bureaucratic streams, and the promise of it. And there's no way around this. This is the promise of it. Mm-hmm. We'll get it right, not like those other idiots. And it was Rob Breckenridge, when you were at the Monroe Institute. That was the week we'd actually kind of had the MPO announced, the Major Projects Office. And Rob made this point when he was filling in for you, and it was fantastic, which was at a certain point, when you have a working bureaucracy versus a not working bureaucracy, you are consigning things to the failed bureaucracy. And I understand the rationale of a cash cutoff. So the military, the Defense Procurement Agency apparently will handle contracts over $100 million. The idea is to allow either Procurement Canada or maybe even the Armed Forces or D&D, Department of National Defense itself, to go out and buy toner for the printers or new shirts for the uniform depots, things like that. And I understand that. But whether it's a new defense agency or it's the MPO, we're not going to be able to get ourselves out of the problems we have by uploading a few small things to a functional bureaucracy while we leave the rest of the country mired in the other one. And what Rob had said was, just because a project isn't major doesn't mean it's not important. So things that aren't going to hit the major projects threshold could still be in the national interest, could generate jobs, prosperity, enhance sovereignty. But we're not going to get done because we're leaving them in the shit system. Meanwhile,
here's the other counterpoint to that. Unless the purpose of this exercise is to purge the inefficient bureaucracy by another means.
So we're not staffing the new organizations enough to do all the work.
But no, but that's why you start. That's why you start. Years, yeah. That's why you start small. So you staff the. Basically, you've given up on the old bureaucratic systems as basically becoming bloated beyond curing. You know that you have to basically. You need to start. So what you do is you create a new bureaucracy, a smaller, leaner bureaucracy that eventually will also become bloated, but you maybe get 20 years lead time on that.
We won't get 20 years.
You started on the small stuff. And then that allows you to bleed the old bureaucracy and attrite it. Attrit?
I think it's attrit, yeah.
You bleed it by attrition. You allow the new, more efficient bureaucracy to take on more and more, and then eventually you just cut the old one.
See, the problem is by the time the small bureaucracy is taken over from the big bureaucracy, it's just the big bureaucracy. And one of the problems we have here.
It takes time to do this. But I mean, essentially this becomes the never-ending change of... they're saying that eventually you have to create a new little tiny bureaucracy to take over from the next bureaucracy. But I mean, this is the way to. The new Major Projects Office
in 30 years will take over from the dysfunctional, bloated, and not fit for purpose Major Projects Office.
But essentially, yes.
I'm not.
that is the system of life. You
the
have
massive projects office.
The new bureaucracy is like a little baby with full of promise and potential, and there's like a couple years where it hits its peak, and then it starts to become decrepit, and its bones fall apart, and then you have to create a new thing. It's the circle of life.
Decrepit bones falling apart. I feel personally attacked. What is making me worried about this, though, is that actually, I'm not here to defend the bureaucrats because we have massive problems in the bureaucracy in the country. We all know that. But I think a lot of the time we misidentify what the problems are. You cannot design a more efficient bureaucracy that will work under existing rules. The rules are the problem. Like, we are getting the bureaucratic performance our processes and rules demand. If you actually want to fix the process, you have to streamline what we're demanding. The government of Canada, and I think provinces, municipalities, they don't exist as decision-making bodies. And this is one of those little context problems we have. You have to, if you want to understand what a problem with an organization is, you have to ask yourself, what is the organization actually doing? We have this mistaken impression that the purpose of our governments is to make timely decisions. It's not. It's supposed to be. But what the purpose of the government actually is accountability avoidance. So until we get to a point where we have prime ministers and ministers and cabinets and PCO officials and senior bureaucrats going down to smaller bureaucrats who are not going to look at every new proposal, not as an opportunity for the country, but as a career-threatening risk to them that must be smothered in blame-deflecting processes, none of our bureaucratic efforts are going to work. So I'm nervous about this, and I'm just starting to think, I find this hilarious, we are creating two-tier government where we're going to have the shit system that we've been using so far. But if you have a good enough lobbyist corps, or if the project is worth enough money, you'll get put into the one that works, where you'll get callbacks in a timely way. This is like, it's hilarious because normally the Liberals are the ones freaking out when we talk about two-tier stuff. But we're getting two-tier bureaucracy in this country. The special one for the special people, and the rest for us losers. So good luck trying to sell something to the military if the project's only worth $99 million. You're shit out of luck. But here is the part that's fun. It was a story that came out this week. Would you like an example of current Canadian military procurement?
Okay. Another one?
It's a new one.
Okay.
Shout out Ottawa Citizen who wrote this story. The Citizen weirdly did not actually break it out in these terms, but it actually included all the data. So I got out a pen and a pad of notepaper, and I read through the Citizen article, and I wrote down all the key dates. So here we go.
Okay.
Canadian Army used to have a vehicle called the Coyote. It was an armored reconnaissance vehicle.
Okay.
It was armed, but its purpose in battle was not to take on the enemy. It was to scout around. It had aerial mast on the top that was retractable, and it could kind of raise way up in the air. It had radio detectors. It had advanced cameras, things like this. These things, in theory, would fan out in front of the main army formations, locate the enemy, and relay that information back. In the Afghanistan war, we discovered these things were a little bit lightly armored. They weren't really designed for insurgency warfare. They were particularly lightly armored on the bottom, so driving over mines or IEDs. So in 2009, the Canadian Armed Forces identified a replacement vehicle as an operational necessity. We needed new ground-based reconnaissance vehicles, and this was in 2009. The Army, when identifying the need for this new vehicle, set 2012 as the desired date to get the first vehicle for operational testing. In fact, the contract to buy the vehicle that was due in 2012 was signed in 2014 by the Harper government. So I'm being nonpartisan here. This is long-standing dysfunction. When the Harper government signed the contract in 2014, they wanted the first vehicle ready for operational testing by 2016. Would you like to know when the first vehicle arrived for operational testing?
2030?
It arrived in 2023. So it took, instead of 2 years, it took 9 years.
Okay.
You want to know
That's not so bad.
You want to know what we discovered when we got it?
Didn't work?
It didn't work.
Oh.
No work good.
Okay.
And the thing that's incredible, the reason the Army was able to go, we should be able to get these things in 2 or 3 years, is because it's actually not that complicated a project.
Yeah, it's just
we wanted to use the existing modernized light armored vehicles that we realized we needed after Afghanistan and basically install on it the same kind of things the Coyote had. So it should have been, by military procurement standards, about as dead simple as something comes. But instead of getting a vehicle in 2 years, we got it in 9. And when we got it, we discovered they no work good. So now after a couple of years of testing, the Army, having spent $1 billion on this program, is now realizing that because of the advances in drone technology, which are very useful in a reconnaissance role, the vehicle might in fact be obsolete. We don't know if we even need these things anymore.
Do you know what we need more of in our Canadian military?
What do we need more of?
Resourceful Afghani jihadis. Because I swear to God, those guys managed to take basically Toyota Jeeps, man, and make them some of the most, and actually work with them to defeat us. So I really think that we should be taking, maybe not so much with the extremist ideology, maybe not so much with that, but really take that jihadist mentality. Let's just take what are those Jeeps called? The ones that work on everything. They work in the desert and they work for 40 years. They're
So it was the Toyotas, I forget which ones, but basically they were called technicals because every insurgent group in the world bought them and put machine guns on the back.
Yes, let's get those. Apparently they work brilliantly in all terrain. You can just make the parts and manufacture the parts. Anybody with a basic education can keep them up.
Can maintain them, yeah.
Can maintain them. Just do that. Put a machine gun on the top of them. And I want more of that kind of thinking. More of that kind of...
The thing that's going to happen is that somebody is going to claim credit for this. They're basically going to go, well, you know what? Advances on the modern battlefield.
Plaque. Yeah, it's going to be another plaque.
Exactly. They're going to give themselves another award.
They're going to make themselves another plaque.
Somebody, sooner or later, is going to go, well, advances on the modern battlefield are such that these... we're going to save billions of dollars by not proceeding with the light reconnaissance surveillance systems vehicle. And it's like, you stupid bastards. We don't need the vehicles because we procure so slowly that the entire paradigm of war has changed. And someone inevitably is going to try and sell this like it's a good idea. So, okay. Fuck. This is not even the worst one I could think of, but it was a new one, and they bring me so much joy / sadness.
Why are ISIS trucks better than ours, said the American GI. It's having a vehicle downrange when you are deployed in the Middle East. Anyone who's in the what are they called? What are these things called?
I know the term the military uses is technical.
There's a particular type of Toyota van that they're using. God, what is it?
I'll look it up. Hang on. Toyota Technicals. I remember this because there was a big feature
it's the Hilux.
years ago.
There you go. It's the Toyota Hilux. It became the vehicle of choice for armed conflicts or guerrilla warfare in the developing world over the last 40 to 50 years. Why don't we just get ourselves fleet fucking Toyota Hiluxes, man?
Because it would take us 16 years to procure them.
No, we we'll buy them. We'll just go to Toyota. We need 20,000 Toyota Hiluxes.
We only planned on getting 66 LRSSs.
Literally, if Afghani jihadis can take a Toyota Hilux, all right, and strap a machine gun to the top of it, I'm confident our troops can work with it.
We'd finally have something a TMU open letter would support.
There you go. On that note,
I want to ask you a question, but I want to throw another one at you. And this is just something that was flagged for me. You probably haven't heard of this. One of our listeners and our readers, Michelle, I told you I'd look into this. She sent me something really interesting. Have you heard about what's been happening in Western New York?
Like what in particular?
If you had heard
happened in place, man.
If you had heard this story, you would have known what I'm referring to.
Okay.
So again, I confess, I hadn't heard about this.
Okay.
On Sunday, the Canada Border Service Agency's computer system went down.
Oh, I did hear about this. Yes. Okay.
They were patching it and it went down. And one of the things we lost the ability to do was to use the electronic system for validating arriving cargo trucks.
Okay.
In theory, there is a paper-based backup, but it's so much slower that in Lewiston and in Buffalo, New York, where there are major bridges crossing into southern Ontario, thousands of trucks were stuck.
Okay.
And this did not make the news at all in Toronto. Or if it did, I completely
remember
missed
seeing
it.
it on the news. I saw this on the news, or at least I saw an alert about it.
You might see, then you might have. I didn't, and I read the news locally every day. So at the urging of Michelle, one of our readers, thank you, Michelle, I went and I was reading local news in Buffalo. They had to find open fields and lots to start parking the trucks in because it was a multi-day wait to get across the border. Look, shit happens. IT failures happen. This is not a uniquely Canadian failure, and I'm not going to go full Pierre Poilievre here and go, Mark Carney's government is stranding trucks at the border. I'm not going to do that. What I am going to say is that this would be a particularly good time for Canada to show, let's pull a name out of the hat, the United States, that we are a reliable, predictable trading partner, scrambling our border crossings to the point where like sensitive cargoes have spoiled because trucks with only 3 days worth of refrigerant were sitting there for 4 days. I'm not going to make this a hugely political issue, but you and I were talking a couple weeks ago. Anything that happens in Canada can get easily clipped these days and end up on Fox News. And the next thing you know, it's being tweeted about by a certain someone on Truth Social. This is simply my appeal to all elements of the Canadian government. Keep your noses clean.
Again, I'm expecting that they are going to write that down. Keep noses clean. Put it on another plaque.
Shout out to CBSA. I asked for a statement. They got me one in 20 minutes.
Well, good for them. On that note, I got to go pick up my kids because apparently I'm going to run out of school in pretty short order, and maybe for the next 3 months. We'll see. So I got to go grab my...
about that.
Yes, but not now and not today, because I gotta go. So on that note, I will say like and subscribe. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca. And next week, I may be coming back to you with tales from the front lines of the Alberta teacher strike.